Elena never imagined her life could turn so dramatically. After her divorce, she found herself completely alone, with only Max, her German shepherd, for company. Jack, her ex-husband, had left without a second thought, taking the last shreds of happiness she had once cherished. The silence in her home became suffocating, and loneliness began to sink her into a dark, desperate place. For weeks, Elena barely interacted with anyone other than Max, living in almost total isolation. Her mind, however, gradually began to churn with wild ideas, seeking any possible way out of her dire financial situation. Each day, she felt less and less capable of handling her life, and the bitterness she held toward Jack grew. Then, one day, a truly outrageous thought crossed her mind. What if she pretended to be pregnant? People had used pregnancy as a sympathy card before, to get some support or benefits, but Elena knew she needed something even bolder. Something absurd enough to make people avoid asking questions. That's when she hit upon the strangest idea she had ever had. What if she claimed that Max, her dog, was the father of her baby? The notion seemed so bizarre that Elena could barely wrap her mind around it. Pretending to be pregnant would be difficult, but claiming Max was the father. That was a level of absurdity no one would expect. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry at her own scheme, but the more she thought about it, the more feasible it began to seem. Who would even think to question something so completely unimaginable? If she could keep up the act long enough, maybe she could secure a little compensation or support before the truth came out. It was a gamble, but in her desperation, Elena was willing to give it a try. She began carefully crafting her deception. Elena bought loose, flowy clothes to suggest the look of pregnancy, and she started to carry herself as if she were actually expecting. She didn't come right out and say who the father was, but she hinted at some cryptic reasons for her secrecy. As expected, the neighborhood started buzzing. Rumors spread quickly as people noted subtle changes in Elena's behavior. She wore oversized clothing, kept to herself, and avoided direct questions. It was obvious that something was happening, and the speculations snowballed. Some whispered that Elena had a secret relationship post-divorce. Others thought she was simply craving attention after being left on her own. But the truth was far stranger than anyone could imagine. All the while, Max remained a steady presence in Elena's life. While she spun her intricate web of lies, he stayed loyally by her side, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding around him. As Elena gained more attention, her confidence in the plan grew. Yet, there was one person who wasn't entirely convinced by her story. Marta, Elena's closest friend, wasn't swayed by the neighborhood gossip. She could tell something didn't add up. She knew Elena had been through a rough time after the divorce, but her friend's continued evasiveness about the father and the strange hints she dropped only fueled Marta's suspicions. One afternoon, Marta decided to confront Elena directly, certain that there was more to the story. She showed up unannounced at Elena's house, determined to get answers. As soon as she stepped inside, she sensed a heavy tension in the air. Elena avoided her gaze, and Max, usually eager to greet visitors, lay quietly in the corner, oblivious to the storm brewing in the room. As soon as Marta stepped into Elena's house, a heavy tension hung in the air, palpable and unnerving. Elena avoided her gaze, and even Max, who usually bounded over to greet visitors with a wagging tail, lay quietly in the corner, detached from the strained atmosphere. Marta sensed immediately that something was wrong, a feeling that only intensified as the visit went on. She attempted casual conversation with Elena, but each of her friend's responses was evasive, skirting the truth. Finally, Marta took a breath and decided to be direct. "How are you holding up? "It must be hard going through this alone," she offered gently, hoping to coax Elena into opening up without pressing too hard. Elena's discomfort was clear. She tried changing the subject, but Marta didn't back down. "Why don't we go to the doctor together next time?" Marta suggested kindly. "You really shouldn't have to face this all by yourself." Elena's reaction was immediate. Her face paled and her hands trembled slightly. No, that's not necessary. I'm fine," she replied quickly, almost too quickly. Marta's suspicions deepened. Elena's reluctance to discuss her pregnancy openly was raising too many red flags to ignore. Determined to uncover the truth, Marta resolved to watch her friend's actions more closely, convinced she would eventually piece together whatever Elena was hiding. After that tense encounter, Marta couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. She sensed, with a clarity that startled even her, that Elena was hiding something enormous. She realized that if Elena wouldn't tell her the truth willingly, she would have to discover it on her own. So, Marta started observing Elena's movements, trailing her discreetly as she went about her day. Several times, she noticed Elena entering a building she claimed was her doctor's office, only to see her settling into a nearby cafe instead, lingering there for hours. There was no indication she was actually attending the prenatal appointments she mentioned. Elena's behavior grew more perplexing with each observation. Marta couldn't fathom why her friend would fabricate such an elaborate story, especially about something as significant as a pregnancy. Still, she waited for the right moment to confront her again, certain now that the pregnancy was nothing but a ruse. One day, Marta decided to stop by Elena's house unannounced, hoping to catch her off guard. When she arrived, she spotted Elena walking Max around the neighborhood, her silhouette sporting a pronounced baby bump. But something seemed off. Elena moved with too much ease for someone supposedly in the final stages of pregnancy. Marta seized the opportunity, strolling over with a casual smile. "Elena, you look great. How's everything going with the baby?" she asked, her tone light but her gaze sharp. Elena's body tensed, her surprise unmistakable, but she tried to maintain her composure. "Everything's fine," she replied, though her voice was forced. As she attempted to steer the conversation elsewhere, something odd happened. Her stomach appeared to shift slightly, almost as if out of place. Marta's sharp eyes caught the irregularity. Though she kept quiet in the moment, her suspicions crystallized. Elena was faking the pregnancy. After this unsettling encounter, Marta couldn't get the strange scene out of her head. She knew her friend was lying, but the reason behind it eluded her. She decided not to confront Elena directly, at least not yet, but her resolve to uncover the truth grew stronger with each passing day. It wasn't long before others in the neighborhood noticed something strange about Elena's situation as well. Tom, a neighbor who had seen Elena's peculiar behavior that same day, began to voice his own suspicions. Soon, whispers spread like wildfire through the community. People started talking openly about the possibility that Elena's pregnancy might be nothing more than an elaborate act. As the rumors spread, Elena found it increasingly difficult to keep up the charade. She tried to go about her routine as if nothing were amiss, but the weight of suspicion pressed down on her, and the fear of being exposed gnawed at her daily. Max, ever the faithful companion, remained by her side, blissfully unaware of the mounting chaos around them. Then, one crisp morning, Elena was startled by a knock at her door. Standing there were two local police officers, informing her that they had received multiple reports regarding her alleged pregnancy. At first, Elena feigned innocence, acting as though she had no idea what they were referring to. The officers were blunt. They needed medical confirmation of Elena's pregnancy to rule out any fraud. At that moment, a wave of panic crashed over her. She knew that if she refused, things would only get worse. With pressure building, she asked the officers for a bit more time to get her paperwork in order. But once they left, the gravity of her lie pressed down harder than ever. The truth was teetering on the edge of exposure. Elena realized she had two options: confess everything now, or try to stretch the lie a little longer. She chose the latter, but in her heart, she knew her time was running out. The rumors were intensifying, and each day brought her closer to the breaking point. Just days after the police visit, Elena found herself at the end of her rope. The weight of maintaining the lie had become too much. Marta, her longtime friend, showed up again, this time with a determination that Elena couldn't evade. "Elena, you can't keep this up," Marta said as she stepped through the door. "I know there's no baby. I've seen enough. This lie, it has to stop." Exhausted and overwhelmed, Elena broke down in tears. She knew there was no escape. "I made it all up," she confessed between sobs. "There's no baby. It was just a lie. I'm alone, out of money, and I thought this might help me, just a little bit." Marta realized the gravity of the situation. Elena's deception had drawn in so many people, and the fallout would be anything but simple. Elena's confession to Marta marked only the beginning of the consequences. Though Marta sympathized with her friend, she knew it wasn't something that could be kept secret. Soon enough, the story of Elena's fabricated pregnancy reached the local authorities. The officers returned, this time with the intent to launch a formal investigation. Elena was called in to answer questions about the deception, which had gone beyond misleading her friends and neighbors. She had also sought financial assistance under false pretenses. The allegations of fraud were serious. Elena's desperate attempt to make the lie outlandish by involving Max, her dog, in the tale, now seemed both absurd and reckless. During her hearing, Elena admitted everything. She explained how desperation had driven her to concoct such an incredible story, hoping no one would question her for fear of the scandal. But the judge had little patience for her reasoning. Elena received a hefty fine for attempted fraud, narrowly avoiding jail time, but was sentenced to hours of community service as part of her punishment. The trial left Elena with not only legal consequences, but also social ones. Her standing in the neighborhood was in shambles. Neighbors who once sympathized with her plight now regarded her with distrust. The idle curiosity that had sparked the initial rumors transformed into a harsh, cautionary tale about the depths of desperation. Each time Elena walked Max through the neighborhood, she could feel the disapproving stares from those around her. Some even crossed the street to avoid her altogether. The isolation she'd tried to fight off with her wild lie now loomed larger than ever. Max remained her steadfast companion, the only true friend she had left. Elena, though ashamed, understood why people had turned their backs on her. She had betrayed their trust, and she knew that mending those broken bonds wouldn't happen overnight. Yet the hurt ran deep, leaving a constant ache that followed her every step. The weight of her actions shadowed her everywhere, reminding her of what she had done and the irrevocable consequences that had unfolded. As Elena wrestled with the aftermath of her deception, news of the scandal eventually reached her ex-husband, Jack. Although he hadn't been involved in her life since the divorce, he couldn't ignore the buzz surrounding the false pregnancy. Surprisingly, Jack decided to reach out to her, not from a place of compassion, but rather out of sheer curiosity, driven to understand how things had spiraled so drastically out of control. Jack wanted to understand just how his ex-wife had sunk so low. One afternoon, he called Elena, and though their conversation was brief, It left a deep impact on her. Jack spoke without a hint of emotion, no words of comfort, no effort to understand. He simply said, "I hope you find a way to put your life back together." His words echoed in Elena's mind long after they hung up. She knew that in reality, her life was no longer his concern, but the reminder of all she had lost. Her marriage, her reputation, and nearly her own dignity stung deeply. That call served as a harsh catalyst, forcing her to confront how she would take her next steps forward. As the months passed, Elena withdrew further from the world around her. She knew any attempts to reconnect with her old friends or neighbors would be in vain. Shame and the weight of her mistakes led her to sever most of the ties she'd once held dear. Max, her loyal German shepherd, became her only companion, her sanctuary on the darkest days. Their daily walks in the neighborhood park were her sole venture outside, a small but necessary ritual. Every time she caught the eyes of a passerby who recognized her, she felt their judgment, a silent condemnation that left her feeling trapped in a bubble of isolation. Yet, in the stillness of her solitude, Elena found herself reflecting on her choices. She recognized that though her actions had been driven by desperation, she had crossed a line she never should have. Pretending to be pregnant, dragging Max into her lie, and exploiting the trust of everyone around her were mistakes she'd have to reckon with, whether or not she liked it. As part of her court-mandated sentence, she was required to attend therapy sessions, something she initially dreaded. Talking to a stranger about her problems seemed unlikely to change anything. However, after a few sessions, her perspective began to shift. Her therapist, a compassionate but no-nonsense woman, helped Elena explore the roots of her despair. Over time, Elena realized that her deception was not just about money. It was an outpouring of her profound loneliness and fear of abandonment. Losing Jack had unbalanced her emotionally, far more than she had been willing to admit. Gradually, therapy became a way for her to start rebuilding her self-worth. The journey was neither quick nor simple, but Elena began to understand that she couldn't overcome her past without facing it head-on. Running from her actions was no longer an option. Her sentence also required her to perform community service in the neighborhood. This obligation was especially painful for Elena, given that most people there knew all about her scandal. But she chose to face it with as much grace as she could muster. Her assignment was to work at an animal shelter, a place where, ironically, she discovered an unexpected source of solace. While the job was challenging, it gave her a way to connect with something that brought her comfort: animals. Each day she fed and cared for abandoned dogs and cats, a task that reminded her of Max's unconditional love. Through this work, she learned valuable lessons about responsibility and empathy. Witnessing the plight of neglected and abused animals revealed a truth she hadn't fully considered: that while everyone makes mistakes, there is always a chance for redemption. In time, Elena found a sliver of peace within this new routine, gradually distancing herself from the chaos of her past. One day, as she worked at the shelter, one of the regular volunteers approached her. It was Grace, an older woman who had been observing Elena for weeks. Though she had heard the rumors about Elena's scandal, Grace chose not to judge her. Instead, she offered her a second chance. "We're looking for someone to help care for the animals on weekends," Grace said. "I've watched you work with them, and I think you'd be a good fit. It's not much, but I'd be able to pay you for your time." Elena hadn't expected such an offer. At first, Elena hesitated to accept the offer. She was deeply afraid her past might overshadow any job she tried to hold. But Grace seemed genuinely invested in helping her. And, after some thought, Elena took a leap of faith and accepted. It was a small opportunity, but one that held the promise of something she hadn't felt in a long while. A sense of purpose, and the chance to piece her life back together. As days turned into weeks, the time she spent at the animal shelter and her regular therapy sessions began to give Elena a new outlook. While she was still reckoning with the fallout of her past mistakes, for the first time in years, she felt she was finally moving forward rather than staying stuck in place. Grace's support at the shelter became a constant, stabilizing force, and her loyal companion Max never left her side. With time, Elena found herself regaining a sliver of the confidence that had all but disappeared. Even though many in the neighborhood still shunned her, the work she did at the shelter became a new reason to rise each morning. Rebuilding her life was neither quick nor easy. It was a journey marked by pain and slow progress. Yet, Elena understood that the past was unchangeable. All she could do was learn from it and make better choices for the future. Gradually, she came to accept that redemption wouldn't be instant, but it was possible nonetheless. She began to realize that if she was ever going to move on, she would need to reconcile with her own history. She knew she could never erase her mistakes, but she also came to see that holding on to shame and regret would only trap her in her old life. One day, Elena decided to take a step toward healing. She would write letters to the people she had hurt with her lies. She didn't expect forgiveness, but she needed to apologize for her actions. She sent a letter to Jack, another to Marta, and even wrote one to the entire neighborhood, though she doubted most would even bother reading it. Just the act of putting her feelings into words helped lift some of the heavy weight she'd been carrying. Though she didn't receive immediate replies, accepting responsibility for her actions brought her a surprising sense of freedom. After everything she had endured, Elena finally glimpsed a faint light at the end of the tunnel. While not everyone could forgive her, and although the path to redemption was long, she began to see the possibility of a second chance. Her work at the shelter remained a central part of her life, and over time she found herself achieving a modest financial stability. Max stayed by her side, his presence a loyal reminder of the goodness she still had within her. With Max's unwavering companionship and her own hard work, Elena dared to hope again, beginning to believe in happiness once more. She had learned that although poor decisions often come with serious repercussions, there is also a chance for redemption and a fresh start. Elena would never be able to fully forget her past, but it no longer defined her. With each passing day, she was creating a new life, one grounded in honesty, responsibility, and, most importantly, hope. And there you have it. Quite the wild tale, right? Just to remind you, this entire story is fiction, crafted for us to dive into the complexities of human emotion and the lengths desperation can sometimes take us. Elena's journey may seem exaggerated, but it raises real questions about loneliness, trust, and the impact of our choices. What we can take from this story is that trying to deceive others, even with good intentions or out of despair, can often lead to consequences that hurt not only others, but also ourselves. Lies have a way of catching up with us, and the longer we hold on to them, the more tangled our lives become. The story reminds us that asking for help, being honest, and taking ownership of our actions are the strongest ways to move forward, no matter how tough things get. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think of Elena's actions? Could she have done something differently? Drop your opinions in the comments below, and let's discuss. And of course, if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales that make us reflect on life's biggest questions. See you next time.